Some stories begin with a grand entrance. This one began with a box. A simple, dust-covered shoebox found behind a closet door on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Inside it, letters. Dozens of them. None of them mailed. None of them meant to be found. But every single one carrying the weight of a man's heart, letters he never sent, to the woman he could never forget. The attic had always held secrets, but on that particular Sunday afternoon, it whispered louder than usual. Rain pelted the roof above like it was trying to tell its own story. Daniel had come home to help clean out his childhood home after his mother moved into assisted living. He didn't expect anything more than dust and maybe a few tears, certainly not a box that would change everything. It was tucked behind an old coat rack, wrapped in a faded red scarf. The box wasn't labeled, but something about it, maybe the way it was hidden so carefully, made Daniel pause. He pulled it out gently, brushing off a fine layer of dust that made him sneeze. The room smelled like cedar and memories. He sat down on the attic floor, his back against the wall, and opened the box. Letters. Neatly folded. Some on old notebook paper, others on thick stationery. Every one addressed the same way, to Evelyn. But there were no stamps. No envelopes. Just raw, open, handwritten confessions. Daniel picked up the first one. May 14, 1983. Evelyn. I saw you today. I wasn't supposed to. I turned the corner and there you were, laughing at something I couldn't hear, your hair caught in the wind like it always did in the spring. I wanted to say something. Anything. But I just watched you walk away. Like I always do. If I were braver, maybe I'd tell you that everything beautiful I've ever written came from the way you looked at me that night under the porch light. Love you, still. James. Daniel blinked. James. His father's name. His father, who died when he was 8. His father, who rarely spoke of the past. His father, who everyone described as steady, quiet, kind, but never heartbreakingly romantic. He read another. July 2, 1984. Evelyn. I heard you're moving away. I don't know if this is goodbye or just another chance to never say what I mean. I used to think time would give me courage. It doesn't. It just dulls the edges, never the core. You were the core, you know. Daniel's hands trembled. He was holding decades of love in fragile pages. Questions began to swirl in his mind. Who was Evelyn? Not his mother, that much he knew. The dates of the letters, they started before his parents met. The rest of the house cleaning was forgotten. Daniel read until the light from the attic window faded into dusk, and the words on the page blurred from more than just the dim lighting. Letter after letter unraveled a love story that was never spoken aloud. There were letters of longing, of missed opportunities, of quiet moments only one heart seemed to carry. There were letters written on birthdays, anniversaries, rainy days, and lonely nights. But none of them were ever sent. Daniel didn't know what he was supposed to feel. A strange reverence grew inside him, like stumbling upon a sacred text written just for one person. A man pouring his soul onto paper, never seeking reply, only release. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He placed the box beside his bed, and at midnight, he pulled out another letter. October 10, 1987. Evelyn. I saw you dancing tonight. You didn't see me. You were wearing that blue dress, the one that made you look like a secret waiting to be told. I drank just enough to want to say something, and not enough to actually do it. I wish I had said something. I wish I had said everything. Daniel began to wonder, what happens to love when it never gets a voice? Does it fade, or does it burrow deeper, like roots refusing to die? He thought about how little he knew his father beyond the quiet smile and weekend fishing trips. These pages, this was the father he never met. The one who loved quietly and fiercely and endlessly. And for the first time in his adult life, Daniel realized he was about to begin the most unexpected journey of all, not through his own life, but through the unlived chapters of another man's heart. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that his father had lived two lives, one visible, full of predictable responsibilities and measured words, and another written between the lines of love letters no one ever saw. After a restless night, he returned to the attic early the next morning, the box clutched in his arms like a lifeline. The light was gentler now, morning sun casting golden shapes on the floorboards. He hadn't told his mother about the letters yet. Not because he wanted to keep them secret, but because he didn't know what questions to ask. Did she know about Evelyn? Had she ever found one of these notes? And most terrifying of all, had she lived knowing she wasn't the first love? Daniel sat beside the box, pulled out a stack of letters, and began organizing them by date. It was oddly calming. Almost sacred. He treated each letter like a museum piece, unfolding the creases slowly, breathing in their paper scent like a message frozen in time. That's when he found it, pressed between two letters dated 1985 and 1986. A photograph. Faded at the edges, slightly curled from age, and creased across the middle. It was black and white, though likely once color, of a woman standing in front of a bookstore. She wore a summer dress, light and floral, and was smiling toward the camera with her head tilted slightly to the side. It wasn't his mother. He knew immediately. His mother had sharp cheekbones and a poised elegance to her, always poised. But this woman had a softness. A warmth that radiated even in monochrome. There was something shy about her smile, as if she wasn't used to being photographed. On the back, in his father's handwriting, were 4 words. Evelyn. July 12, 1985. Daniel sat frozen. The photo made everything real in a way the letters hadn't. This wasn't just poetic longing. There was a face. A real person. Someone who had walked the same streets, breathed the same air. Someone his father had loved, truly loved. He stared at her face for what felt like an hour. Then, as though compelled, he went back to the letter from that same month. July 12, 1985. Evelyn. You laughed when I tried to take this photo. You always hated being the subject. Said cameras made you feel flattened. But I caught you anyway. I just wanted to remember this exact moment, how you looked when you turned to smile at me for no reason at all. This picture won't show it, but I was falling in love with you all over again. Daniel exhaled slowly. So many emotions crowded his chest, confusion, admiration, sorrow, and something unnameable that felt like grief, but wasn't his to carry. He needed to know who Evelyn was. Not just as the name at the top of a letter, but as a person. Where was she now? Was she still alive? Did she ever know how much his father had written to her? Did she ever write back? There were no return letters in the box. No sign that the love was mutual. But the intensity of James' words made Daniel wonder if it had ever truly ended between them, or if it had just stopped. As he sat with the photo in hand, something else struck him. His father never wrote about a final goodbye. The letters faded out around 1989, about a year before Daniel was born. There was no letter that said, "This is the last time." No closure. Just silence. The weight of that silence began to gnaw at Daniel's curiosity. Had his father chosen to move on? Or had life, with its cruel and quiet way, taken the choice away? Daniel stood up suddenly, holding the photo tightly. He needed answers. And there was only one person who might have them. His mother. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of toast and brewed coffee. His mother sat at the table, wrapped in her usual thick cardigan, paging through a gardening magazine she didn't really read anymore. Her silver hair was pulled back in a soft bun. She looked up when he entered. "You're up early," she said, smiling. Sleep okay? Daniel sat across from her and placed the photo on the table between them. The smile disappeared from her face instantly. She reached for the photo slowly, like it might vanish if she moved too quickly. Her fingers hovered just over the edge. I found this in the attic, Daniel said gently. In a box, with letters. To her. His mother finally picked up the photograph and stared at it with a depth of emotion Daniel couldn't read. After a long pause, she said softly, "So you found Evelyn?" Daniel's breath caught. "You knew?" he asked. She nodded, not looking at him. "Not everything. But enough. He never spoke of her after we married. But once, after your father passed, I found a letter in his drawer. I didn't read it. Just saw the name." "Who was she?" His mother stared at the picture. "She was the almost," she said. "The almost that some people carry forever." Daniel didn't speak. He didn't know how to. His mother placed the photo down gently, then folded her hands in her lap. "I knew James loved me. I never doubted that. But love can come in different shades. And I think, a part of him always stayed in the past." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. He suddenly realized that love wasn't always about happy endings or perfect timing. Sometimes, it was about the letters you never send, the photos you never share, the quiet you carry for years. And now, it was about what he would do with all of it. The day after speaking with his mother, Daniel found himself caught between grief and fascination. The story unfolding in those attic boxes had cracked open a part of his heart he didn't even know was sealed shut. He returned to the attic with a reverence he couldn't explain. The air was still thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, and now the box seemed heavier, loaded not just with memories, but with truths long hidden beneath years of quiet. Daniel wanted to understand Evelyn beyond the photograph. Beyond the letters. Beyond the heartbreak. There were still dozens of unopened envelopes left. Some brittle and delicate, others sturdy as if they were written just last week. As he sifted through them, he noticed something unusual, a paperback novel, dog-eared and worn, buried beneath the bottom layer of letters. It was Of Time and Stars, a science fiction collection by Arthur C. Clarke. Daniel smiled. His father had been obsessed with space and time travel. Growing up, Daniel had fallen asleep more than once to his father's long-winded explanations about wormholes and the paradoxes of quantum mechanics. But this copy was different. Inside the cover was a short handwritten message. For E, time stretches when I'm with you. J. And below it, a small note in different handwriting, soft cursive with ink slightly faded. I miss you when the stars are quiet. E. Daniel's chest tightened. She had written back. It wasn't just a one-sided love after all. Evelyn had left a trace. A whisper. A name in the margins. Carefully, he flipped through the pages. Tiny markings lined the text, circles around certain words, asterisks beside specific sentences. And in the margins, Evelyn had written small thoughts. Observations. Jokes. Questions. Her presence lived in the book like an echo. One that had been waiting, patient and still, all these years. Page 17. We were born too late to explore the earth and too early to explore the stars. Evelyn's note. Maybe we were born exactly on time, to explore each other. Daniel's fingers trembled as he turned the pages. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was intimacy. It was love, quietly etched in pencil beside cosmic musings and sci-fi dreams. Evelyn wasn't a fantasy. She was real, and she had loved his father back. And now Daniel wanted to find her, not to confront or accuse or stir the past, but to thank her. To let her know that someone had kept the story alive. But where could he begin? He didn't even know her last name. He placed the book aside and went back to the letters. He started scanning for any clue, anything that might offer a breadcrumb trail to follow. Most of the letters were addressed simply to Evelyn, with no last name, no return address, no geographical markers. But then, tucked inside a December envelope from 1986, he found something else. An old postcard. It was creased at the corners, the image on the front faded, a snowy mountain scene, likely from Colorado. On the back, in his father's handwriting. "Tell me this doesn't look like Silver Pines Lodge." And in Evelyn's script, just below. "It does. Especially the old swing on the east side. See you next Christmas. Silver Pines Lodge." It was the first real lead. Daniel raced downstairs, phone in hand. A quick search revealed a small, family-owned lodge in Estes Park, Colorado. Still running. Still open. Still there. He stared at the screen. His fingers hovered over the call button. This was ridiculous, wasn't it? What was he going to say? "Hi, I'm the son of a man who may have loved someone connected to your lodge 40 years ago. Any chance you know who she is?" But something deeper than logic pushed him. He pressed call. After 3 rings, a gentle voice answered. "Silver Pines Lodge, this is Marlene." Daniel cleared his throat. "Hi. This is a bit of a strange question, but I'm looking for someone who might have stayed there frequently in the 80s. Her name was Evelyn. I'm afraid I don't know her last name." There was a pause. Then a chuckle. "Well, that narrows it down," Marlene said kindly. "I'm not sure I can help unless you've got more to go on." Daniel sighed. "I found a postcard. My father mentioned the lodge. He passed away last year. The woman he wrote to, Evelyn, was someone he cared for deeply. I don't mean to intrude. I'm just trying to understand." There was a longer silence this time. Then Marlene's tone changed. "Wait a minute," she said softly. "James. Your father's name, was it James?" Daniel froze. "Yes. James Carter?" "Yes," he said again, more breathless this time. "I was just a teenager then," she said. "But I remember them. James and Evelyn. They came a few winters in a row. Quiet couple. Kind. Always had their noses in books. My parents ran the place then. I haven't thought about them in years." Daniel's throat tightened. "Do you know what happened to her?" There was another pause. I think Evelyn moved east. To Vermont, maybe. After they stopped coming together, she sent one postcard. Alone. I always wondered why." Daniel gripped the phone tighter. "Do you remember her last name?" "I'd have to check the old logs," she said. "They're probably packed away in the office. Give me a few days." Daniel thanked her profusely, heart pounding. The past wasn't just a story anymore. It was a trail, one he was now walking step by step. And for the first time, it felt like he wasn't just searching for Evelyn. He was rediscovering his father. 3 days passed like molasses in January. Daniel felt like he was holding his breath the entire time, waiting for a call that might never come. Every vibration of his phone made his heart lurch. He checked his email obsessively. He tried to busy himself with work, chores, anything to distract him, but everything felt like static, just noise around the anticipation. On the 4th morning, just as he was pouring himself a second cup of coffee, his phone rang. Silver Pines Lodge. He answered so fast he nearly dropped the mug. "Hello?" "Hi, Daniel. This is Marlene from the lodge." "Yes, hi, thank you so much for calling me back." Her voice was warm, tinged with something thoughtful, like she'd been sitting with old memories for a while. Well, I dug through the old reservation books like I said. Found the winter entries from 1985 to 1987. Your father always booked under the name James Carter, just like you said. And Evelyn, she paused. Her last name was Whitaker. Evelyn Whitaker. Daniel felt the name land in his chest like a bell. He whispered it aloud, Evelyn Whitaker. I couldn't find a phone number, Marlene continued. But I did find something else. In the 1987 book, someone had scribbled an address beside her name. It's a long shot, it's over 35 years old, but it might be something. She read it to him. An address in Brattleboro, Vermont. Daniel jotted it down with shaking hands. Marlene, thank you. Really. I don't even know how to. No need, she said gently. It's a beautiful thing you're doing. Keep going. When he hung up, the apartment felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. He stared at the address. He didn't know if Evelyn still lived there. Or if she was even alive. But now he had something real. That weekend, he packed a small bag, charged his phone, and loaded the address into his GPS. Brattleboro was a 6-hour drive from Boston, far enough to feel like a journey, close enough that he couldn't talk himself out of it. The weather was mercifully clear. Winter was creeping in, but the sun still painted gold across the skeletal trees. As the miles ticked by, Daniel found himself rehearsing what he might say. You don't know me, but, felt woefully inadequate. When he finally turned down the snow-dusted side street in Vermont, his stomach tightened. The address led him to a small, blue cottage tucked behind a split-rail fence, with a bird feeder hanging from the porch. It was quiet. Peaceful. He sat in the car for 5 full minutes before he could make his legs move. As he approached the front door, he noticed wind chimes hanging from a beam, handmade, with tiny stars and moons dangling on thin strings. The kind of detail someone like his father would have admired. Daniel knocked gently. No answer. He knocked again. After a few seconds, the door opened a crack. A woman peered out, gray-haired, with wise, watchful eyes. She wore a thick cardigan and had a paperback book in one hand. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Evelyn, he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She stared at him, quiet. Yes, she said finally, cautious but not unkind. Can I help you? I'm Daniel. James Carter's son. At that, her eyes widened. The book fell to her side, and the door opened a little more. Daniel continued. He passed away last year. I found your letters. Your name. The lodge. The book with the notes in the margins. I needed to find you. I needed to know the rest of the story. Her eyes misted instantly. She stepped back, motioning gently for him to come in. Inside, the home was warm and quiet, filled with books and little signs of a life lived deliberately. A painting of a pine forest hung over the fireplace. A kettle whistled softly on the stove. Evelyn led him to the kitchen table and sat across from him, still silent. I'm sorry if this is too much, Daniel said quickly. I don't want to disturb your life. I didn't know about you. About what you meant to him. And after reading your letters, it felt wrong not to say something. Not to say thank you. Evelyn looked at him with eyes the color of old sea glass. Kind, weathered, and brimming. You look like him, she said softly. Daniel smiled. I've heard that. They sat in stillness for a moment, the kind that feels sacred. He never told you about me, she asked finally. He shook his head. No. Not a word. Her expression folded into something bittersweet. We had our time. And we had our reasons. Life moved on. For both of us, I suppose. Daniel nodded, unsure of what else to say. But then Evelyn rose, walked to a small wooden cabinet, and pulled out a narrow box wrapped in cloth. She placed it on the table. I kept them too, she said. Every letter he sent. Every photograph. Even the one of that ridiculous snowman he built in '86. Daniel laughed, the sound catching in his throat. And together, they opened the box. The box was light in Daniel's hands, yet somehow it felt like it weighed the sum of 30 years. Its corners were worn smooth, and the cloth wrapping had the scent of cedar and thyme. Evelyn untied it gently, her fingers moving with the tenderness one reserves for sacred things. I haven't opened this in over a decade, she admitted. But I knew someday, someone might come looking. Daniel held his breath as the lid creaked open. Inside, there was a small stack of letters, neatly bundled with ribbon, the paper yellowing at the edges. Beneath them, a handful of photographs, some black and white, others in soft, faded color. And beneath those, an envelope marked with a single word. Daniel. His name. Daniel reached for it with a hand that trembled, the moment cracking his chest wide open. Evelyn looked away, giving him a fragile smile. He must have written that toward the end. I didn't know he'd kept writing after we lost touch. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in his father's unmistakable hand. The strokes were shaky, but still firm, still full of that quiet grace that had marked every page of the journal he left behind. To my son, Daniel. I don't know when, or even if, you'll ever read this. But if you are, it means something in the stars shifted, and you found the path I buried too deep. There's so much I never said out loud, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. I grew up thinking that silence was strength, that keeping pain private was the honorable thing. But now, with time closing in, I understand the damage that silence can do. I loved Evelyn. Deeply. She was a season in my life that changed everything. We met when the world still felt new to me, before your mother, before the long hours, the suits, and the office lights. Our love didn't end because it failed. It ended because the world got in the way. Expectations. Geography. Life. We let go when we should have held on. And though I built a good life afterward, though I loved your mother and cherished every moment of raising you, Evelyn was the page I never turned. You were always the best part of my life. But a part of me always hoped that one day, you'd find this box. That you'd know your father wasn't just a man of routines and quiet dinners and spreadsheets. I was once young. Foolish. Brave in some ways, cowardly in others. Don't make the same mistake I did, Daniel. Don't wait to say the things that matter. Don't bury your heart beneath the weight of responsibility and call it virtue. Tell the people you love that you love them. And if you ever find Evelyn, tell her I remembered. Every winter. Every letter. Every laugh. I hope you understand me better now. With all the love I never said aloud. Dad. Daniel sat in silence, tears gathering like dew in the corners of his eyes. Evelyn had turned away, pretending to read a grocery list on the fridge. He folded the letter slowly, as if sealing something precious back into place. I didn't know he was carrying all of that, Daniel whispered. Evelyn smiled gently, still facing away. He was always carrying something. We both were. He looked back into the box. The letters between them spanned years. Some were long and poetic, others short and filled with nothing but longing. There were photos of snow-covered hills, of two young lovers bundled in scarves and hope. One image caught his attention, a Polaroid of his father and Evelyn standing in front of Silver Pines Lodge, holding mugs of hot cocoa, a dog curled at their feet. The woman in the photo was laughing, her eyes closed, her head tilted toward his father's shoulder. Do you ever regret it? He asked her. Letting go? She didn't answer right away. She turned back to him, her face lined but soft. I regret the silence. Not the love. Daniel nodded, understanding in a way he couldn't have just weeks ago. The hours passed easily. Evelyn made tea, and they sifted through the memories together. She told him about the winter storms they braved, how his father always insisted on building a snowman even when it was too cold, how he once read her poetry under a sky of falling snowflakes. He was such a contradiction, she said, eyes distant. Quiet and steady on the outside. But inside? He burned bright. Daniel smiled. I think I inherited the quiet part. Still working on the burning bright. Evelyn looked at him with something like pride. No. I think you're already brighter than you know. Later, when the sky turned dusky and the wind began whispering through the pines, Daniel stood at the doorway, unsure of how to say goodbye. I don't know what I expected, he said. But I'm glad I came. I'm glad you did, too, she replied. He hesitated. Would it be okay if I visited again? Maybe asked more questions? Evelyn reached out and took his hand. You'll always be welcome here, Daniel. Always. And for the first time in months, he felt something inside him begin to thaw. The drive back from Silver Pines was slow and hushed, not just because of the soft snow falling like whispers from the sky, but because Daniel's mind was full. Every mile he traveled felt like peeling back another layer of memory, some his own, some borrowed from a man he was still learning to understand. The windshield wipers ticked back and forth in a steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the old Subaru that had carried him through more than one emotional journey. The mountains slowly gave way to flatter terrain, but the elevation in his chest didn't drop. It rose. Daniel kept glancing at the passenger seat where the small wooden box now sat, belted in like precious cargo. It had taken him a few minutes of deliberation to ask Evelyn if he could take it home. Part of him worried it was too personal, too sacred. But she had simply nodded. Some stories need more than one pair of eyes, she had said. The sky darkened as he crossed back into town. He was only an hour from home when he pulled off onto a quiet overlook, a spot where the mountains stretched out into distant blue-gray silhouettes. He stepped out of the car, the air sharp in his lungs, and let the silence settle over him like snow. It was there, leaning against the cool metal of his car, that Daniel opened the box again, not to read, but to sit with it. To honor it. His father had loved deeply and quietly. Daniel wondered how often he himself had chosen silence when love was asking to be spoken aloud. He thought of his mother, of her quiet grief after his father passed, of how she had never once spoken of Evelyn. Had she known? Had she chosen silence, too? The wind picked up and with it came a soft, phantom echo, his father's voice, maybe, or maybe just the wind pretending to be him. Either way, it felt like permission. He took out one of the letters. This one was from Evelyn to his father, dated 25 years ago. Dear Sam. I thought I could stop writing. That if I stopped, the ache would quiet. But it hasn't. It just moved places. Into the spaces between thoughts, between waking and sleep. You always said the snow was your favorite season. I hated it, remember? But now it comes and I wait for it, hoping it brings your memory with it. Daniel folded it back carefully. There was a stillness in that moment that didn't need to be filled. It was a different kind of silence, one that honored love, not hid from it. He drove the rest of the way home in silence, letting the hum of the tires on wet pavement do the talking. When he arrived, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. Daniel set the box gently on the kitchen table, turned on the kettle, and stood by the window as steam began to rise. Outside, the snow had followed him, dusting the streets and rooftops, softening the world's sharp edges. He didn't sleep much that night. Instead, he stayed up reading the letters, one by one. Not devouring them like a man starving, but sipping them slowly, like a good whiskey. There was laughter in those pages, moments of jealousy, dreams they'd once dared to say out loud. He found poems scrawled in the margins, ink smudged from old tears. These were not love letters in the cliched sense, they were real. Messy. Human. And as he read, Daniel began to write. Not a journal entry, but a letter. To no one in particular. To everyone. To his father. To Evelyn. To himself. Dear whoever finds this one day. Love doesn't always look like the movies. Sometimes it looks like absence. Like silence. Like winter. But it lingers. It teaches you even after it's gone. My father taught me that. And now I know, the people we love don't leave us. They just change rooms. He placed the letter in the box and closed the lid, hands reverent. The next morning, the sky was a canvas of soft pink and silver. Daniel stepped outside with his coffee, still barefoot on the porch, and breathed in the new day. He felt different, not fixed, not whole, but more real. As if he'd stepped out of a fog and into his own body. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Saw you drove up to the mountains. Everything okay? Daniel stared at the screen for a moment. He typed, erased, typed again. Yeah. I found a part of Dad I never knew existed. I think you'd want to hear about it. 3 dots appeared, then stopped. Then another message. Come by for dinner? He smiled. Wouldn't miss it. The drive to his mother's house was short, 12 minutes, 10 if the lights cooperated, but it felt longer today. Daniel wasn't sure what he was about to walk into. Or what he would say. The snow had begun to melt in patches along the curb, but the cold lingered, biting at his fingers even through his gloves. As he pulled into the driveway, he could see the porch light already glowing, a welcoming beacon against the gray winter afternoon. Through the lace-curtained window, he spotted the silhouette of his mother, moving about the kitchen like a memory in motion. Daniel sat in the car for another moment, fingers tapping the steering wheel. You're not a kid anymore, he whispered to himself, then smiled at how ridiculous it sounded. As if age had anything to do with the knots in his stomach. He walked to the door, the wooden box carefully tucked under one arm. When he knocked, it opened almost instantly. Daniel, his mother said, smiling. You're freezing, get in here. She hugged him, holding on longer than usual. There was something new in her embrace, tentative, searching. Inside, the warmth wrapped around him like a favorite sweater. The familiar scent of rosemary chicken wafted from the oven, and the table was already set for 2. Everything was familiar, yet he knew this night would be anything but ordinary. I made your favorite, she said, walking back to the kitchen. I didn't tell you I was coming until an hour ago. She shrugged, her back to him. Call it mother's intuition. Daniel placed the wooden box on the sideboard near the framed family photos, the ones that told a simpler version of their story, birthdays, graduations, holidays. All of them captured smiles, none captured the silences. Dinner was calm, almost too calm. The clinking of cutlery on ceramic filled the space between hesitant conversation, updates about work, how the furnace was acting up again, that Mrs. Halvorsen next door had finally adopted a cat. It wasn't until his plate was nearly empty that Daniel looked up and asked, Did you ever meet Evelyn? The question landed like thunder in a quiet forest. His mother froze, fork halfway to her mouth, then slowly set it down. A long breath. A longer silence. I did, she finally said, eyes not meeting his. Once. Daniel blinked. You never said anything. There are a lot of things we don't say, she murmured. Especially when we're trying to hold something together. He leaned back, trying to process. Why? I mean, she and Dad? Yes. She nodded. They loved each other. That was never a secret, not to him, not to me. His pulse quickened. Then why did he stay? With us? She finally looked up. Her eyes, a mirror of his own, were brimming with something both old and freshly stirred. Because he loved you, too. And me, in his way. Life isn't always about choosing the strongest love. Sometimes it's about choosing the life you can live with. Daniel felt like the air had shifted, like the house had settled differently on its foundation. I read their letters, he said softly. I brought them with me. Her gaze moved to the box on the sideboard. A small nod. I figured you would. Are you angry? No, she said. Not anymore. I was. For a long time. Angry at him, at her, at myself. But time wears the edges off things. And grief makes room for strange understandings. Daniel stood and walked to the sideboard. He opened the box and took out a single letter, handing it to her. This one. I think you should read it. She hesitated, then took it. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the page. Daniel stepped away, giving her space, watching as her face shifted from tension to something he couldn't quite name. When she finished, she placed the letter on the table, folded but not hidden. He wrote that after your first piano recital, she said, her voice quieter now. He came home that night and cried. Said he wasn't sure he deserved any of it, me, you, the life we had. He felt like an actor in someone else's story. Daniel sat down again. I think he wanted both stories to be true. She looked at him then, really looked. And maybe they were. They sat there in the stillness of the truth, years of questions finally laid bare, not with bitterness but with something closer to peace. Later, they moved to the living room. She made tea, and he lit the old lamp beside the bookshelf. They didn't speak much after that. Some truths didn't need to be repeated. As he left, she kissed his forehead. Keep the letters, she said. He'd want you to. Outside, the snow had stopped completely. The stars had come out. Daniel looked up, exhaled, and whispered, Thanks, Dad. The letters sat in his lap like sacred artifacts, fragile, worn, and humming with the weight of unsaid things. Daniel hadn't meant to stay up this late, but once he got back to his apartment, something compelled him to read through them again. Not just skim. Read. The kind of reading you do when the words feel like they were written to your bones. He sat on the floor with his back against the couch, the wooden box open beside him, a steaming mug of chamomile forgotten on the coffee table. Rain whispered against the windows, soft and rhythmic, as if the sky were sighing. Each letter was addressed with such care. His father's handwriting had been meticulous, especially in the earlier ones, each curve and line a reflection of something deeper, restraint, hope, fear. Evelyn. I dreamed of the beach again last night. You were walking ahead of me, laughing, and I kept trying to call out to you. But the wind carried my voice away. You never turned around. Daniel read those lines over and over, imagining the dream, wondering if Evelyn had ever read this one. A few letters, like this one, weren't addressed with a date. Some looked never sent. He picked up another. Evelyn. I want you to know that when I hold my son's hand, I see you. I see your steadiness, your curiosity. I don't know what kind of father I'd be without you in my thoughts. You've shaped me, even in absence. His chest tightened. He hadn't expected that. To be mentioned. To be included. He sat back, letter trembling in his fingers. What kind of love leaves its fingerprints on everything, even the parts it doesn't touch directly? He whispered. The wooden box creaked slightly when he shifted. There, tucked between two envelopes, was something he hadn't noticed before, a single sheet, folded twice, with a sticky note on it. The note read simply, in his father's writing. Never mailed. Maybe it's his someday. Daniel opened it slowly. It was addressed not to Evelyn, but to him. Daniel. If you're reading this, it means you found the letters. And maybe, by now, you've read enough to question everything you thought you knew. I hope you have. Because that means you're thinking like a man. There are things I never said. About who I was. About who I wanted to be. About the parts of my life I tried to fold neatly into drawers that never quite closed. You grew up watching me through a filtered lens, seeing the pieces I allowed. But behind that was a man who loved two people, deeply and differently. Who struggled every day to do right by one without erasing the other. You didn't just come from me, Daniel. You came from the choices I made to stay. And if you're angry, I understand. If you're confused, good. That means your heart is open. And if you're still reading, then maybe you can forgive me for being unfinished. Love. Dad. Daniel sat there for what felt like hours. He didn't cry, not yet. He didn't know how to. Not with all of this stretching out in front of him like a field that needed to be crossed barefoot, one thorn at a time. But he felt the burn behind his eyes. Unfinished. That word echoed. And oddly enough, it didn't sound like regret. It sounded like permission. There were letters here that had never been sent. Thoughts that had never reached their intended hearts. Maybe that's why his father left them behind, for Daniel to decide what to do with them. And in a strange, twisted way, that was a kind of trust. Daniel stood, collected the letters back into the box with reverent hands, and placed the letter addressed to him on top. He looked around his apartment, quiet, dim, filled with half-packed boxes and unanswered questions. Then he reached for his phone and scrolled to the contacts. He hesitated over one, Evelyn. He didn't know if she'd answer. Didn't know if this was even still her number. But he thought about the years she'd spent loving someone in silence, in patience, in distance. The years she'd been part of his story without being part of his life. He pressed call. The phone rang once. Then twice. Then. Hello? The voice was soft. Older. Wary. Daniel's breath caught. Hi, is this Evelyn? A pause. Yes. Who's calling? He closed his eyes, heart pounding. My name is Daniel. I think you knew my father. Mark Alden. Silence again. Then a quiet, trembling inhale. Yes. I did. Daniel gripped the phone tighter, and with a voice gentler than he knew he had, said, I think he left some letters for both of us. Letters? Evelyn's voice barely registered above a whisper, as though the word itself carried 1,000 memories and twice as many questions. Daniel stood in silence, heart hammering, suddenly afraid he had stepped over a line too delicate to see. He imagined her sitting in a quiet house somewhere, curled on a chair with a book, or perhaps sipping tea in an old kitchen surrounded by fading photographs. Was she still in Portland? Or had she moved, chasing some quiet life away from all of this? Yes, he said finally. Letters. My father wrote them to you. A lot of them. A long pause. So long he thought the call had dropped. I wasn't sure if anyone would ever find those, she said at last. Her voice was careful, worn down at the edges by years, but still composed. He said he kept them, but I never saw them again after he left. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch. He kept them. Every single one. Some dated, some not. Some never even opened. She let out a soft exhale, almost like a laugh but sadder, like a memory breathing out. He was always so restrained, she said. Like love was something to be managed. Like feeling it too much might burn the whole world down. Daniel nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Yeah. That sounds like him. There was a beat of silence. Then Evelyn asked, "Why are you calling me, Daniel?" It was the kind of question that deserved an honest answer. And he wasn't entirely sure he had one. But he tried. "I think I'm calling because he's gone. And these letters, they feel like he left pieces of himself behind that don't belong just to me. They're yours too." The phone line buzzed softly. He heard her draw a shaky breath. "He used to write to me every Thursday. Without fail. Even after he got married. Even after your mother had you." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Wait, even after?" "He didn't mail them," she clarified quickly. "He stopped that. But he never stopped writing them. I suppose he couldn't help it. Love doesn't just end. It morphs. It quiets. But it doesn't go away." That thought pressed heavy against Daniel's chest. All his life, he had imagined his father as a man who made clean decisions, who moved forward without looking back. But the letters told a different story, one of longing, guilt, and unresolved tenderness. "Do you want to read them?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me does. The other part is terrified." He understood that. Completely. "I could bring them to you," he offered. "No pressure. Just, if you'd want to see them. Or talk. Or maybe tell me about him, the parts one didn't know." For a long time, the only sound was Evelyn's breath. Then, softly, she said, "Do you like coffee?" The question caught him off guard. He smiled despite himself. "Yeah. I do. There's a little cafe on Hawthorne and 41st. If it's still there. They used to make the best cappuccinos in the city. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Around 10. "Okay," he said. "I'll be there." When the call ended, Daniel didn't move for a while. He just stared at the letters in front of him, the weight of them suddenly lighter, as if sharing them had lifted some of their gravity. He didn't know what he expected to find at that cafe. Closure? Understanding? Maybe just another layer of the man he was still trying to uncover. But he knew this, the woman on the other end of that call had waited a lifetime for answers. And maybe now, they were both ready to read the truth together. The morning air was brisk but alive with promise as Daniel made his way toward the cafe on Hawthorne. He felt a strange cocktail of nerves and hope settling in his chest. What if Evelyn looked at him with eyes full of anger? Or worse, indifference? What if the letters dredged up more pain than healing? He pushed those thoughts aside as he stepped through the cafe's glass door, greeted by the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and the soft murmur of early patrons. The place hadn't changed much since he'd last visited years ago with his father. The worn wooden tables bore the patina of countless conversations, some joyous, some heavy with secrets. Scanning the room, his eyes landed on her, a woman sitting alone at a corner table, a steaming cappuccino cradled in her hands. Her hair was streaked with silver, and the lines on her face told stories of laughter, sorrow, and endurance. But there was something undeniably familiar in her quiet strength. Evelyn looked up as he approached, a tentative smile breaking across her face. "Daniel?" she asked, voice steady despite the flutter in her eyes. "That's me," he replied, pulling out the chair opposite her. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. "I brought the letters," Daniel finally said, reaching into his bag and pulling out the wooden box. Evelyn's eyes softened as she reached for it, tracing the edges with careful fingers. "These are the pieces of him I never got to hold," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing them." Daniel nodded. "I think, maybe we both need to understand the man he was," and the man he wanted to be. She opened the box and began unfolding letters, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. As she read, her expression shifted from sadness to something more complicated, perhaps forgiveness, or acceptance. "I always wondered if he struggled with loving us both," Evelyn said softly. "If he felt torn." Daniel swallowed hard. "He did. More than I ever realized." They spent hours sharing memories, some tender, some painful. They laughed at the awkward moments, and sometimes tears leaked out when the memories cut too deep. In that cafe, amidst the hum of life outside, two strangers bound by a man's legacy began to build a fragile bridge. They weren't just unraveling a past, they were weaving a new story of connection. When the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the window, Daniel realized something profound. Sometimes, the people we think are lost to us are just waiting for us to find the right moment to listen. The days that followed that cafe meeting were unlike any Daniel had experienced before. The letters they'd pored over weren't just ink on paper, they were a portal into his father's soul, revealing a man both vulnerable and fiercely human. With Evelyn, Daniel found a companion in unearthing those secrets, each letter peeling back layers of truth, regret, and love that neither of them had ever dared to confront alone. It wasn't easy. Some letters held confessions that hit like punches to the gut, admissions of failures and doubts, the kind of raw honesty that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Others were tender, filled with hope and promises that now seemed almost impossibly fragile. One evening, as Daniel sat at his kitchen table, a single letter caught his eye. It was postmarked from a small town in Oregon, far from the hustle of Portland and the chaos of the city. The handwriting was shaky, more urgent than the others. He read aloud to Evelyn over the phone. "I am tired, Evelyn. Not just tired in body, but in spirit. I fear the man I want to be is slipping through my fingers. Yet, when I think of you, and of Daniel, I find a flicker of light. Maybe that is enough to keep me going. I hope one day you'll forgive me for the distance I have kept, for the silence I could not break." Daniel's voice trembled as he finished. "He was fighting demons I didn't know existed." Evelyn sighed deeply. "We all have them, don't we? The ones we hide even from ourselves." They started piecing together more than just words, old photographs, faded mementos tucked between pages, and even recorded messages Daniel's father had left on answering machines. Each discovery revealed a man conflicted between duty and desire, between the roles he played and the person he truly was inside. Daniel found himself asking questions he never had the courage to before. Why did his father keep such an emotional distance? Why did he write letters but rarely speak his feelings? Was it fear? Shame? Or simply the way he was taught to be a man? One night, exhausted from a day filled with sorting through decades of memories, Daniel sat back and realized something vital. In trying to understand his father's silence, he was learning to listen to his own heart for the first time. The same walls that had kept his father trapped were ones he was beginning to dismantle. He and Evelyn promised to continue their journey together, not just for themselves but for the memory of a man whose story was far from finished. They were no longer just uncovering secrets, they were healing wounds passed down through generations. And in that shared pain and hope, something new began to grow, a fragile but unbreakable bond, stitched together by truth and the courage to finally face it. Forgiveness. It's a simple word, yet it carries the weight of entire lifetimes. For Daniel, forgiveness was a mountain he had never dared to climb. The word echoed in his mind like a distant bell, heard, but never truly understood or felt. After years of harboring anger, confusion, and a gnawing emptiness where his father's presence should have been, Daniel now found himself confronting something far more complex than resentment. He sat alone in his small apartment on a cold, rainy afternoon. The rain tapped rhythmically on the window, a steady percussion that somehow matched the tumult inside his chest. The letters lay spread before him, a chaotic mosaic of emotions written in faded ink, each one a voice from a past that refused to stay buried. Among them was one particular letter, dated just weeks before his father vanished from his life entirely, a letter that read like a desperate plea for understanding. "I am so sorry for the pain I have caused you, Daniel," the letter said in a shaky script. "If I could turn back time, I would be the father you deserved. I hope someday you can forgive the man I was." Daniel's eyes lingered on those words. The admission was raw, unguarded. A glimpse into the man behind the mask, the flawed, struggling father who had battled demons that Daniel was only now beginning to grasp. His fingers trembled as he traced the lines on the paper. Forgiveness, Daniel thought, was not about wiping the slate clean. It was not about excusing the past or pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about releasing the hold those old wounds had on his heart. But how do you forgive someone who never asked for it? How do you forgive someone who left you to navigate the wreckage alone? The silence in his apartment felt oppressive, yet it was in that silence that Daniel's thoughts began to unravel. He recalled the nights he lay awake as a child, waiting for a father who never came home, the quiet dinners where words between them were scarce and heavy, and the empty chair at every milestone, every celebration. The weight of absence was suffocating. On the other side of the country, Evelyn listened carefully as Daniel poured his heart out during their weekly call. Her voice was steady, a comforting anchor in his storm. "Forgiveness is a process," she said gently. "It's messy and slow, and sometimes it feels like you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It's okay if you're not ready to forgive him fully. The first step is just to understand why he was the way he was." Daniel nodded even though she couldn't see him. "I think I've spent so long blaming him that I never stopped to wonder if he was just as broken as I felt. Maybe even more." Evelyn sighed, the sound soft but filled with empathy. "People carry invisible battles, Daniel. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself, for holding on to pain or for the expectations we thought were fair but never met." Her words struck a chord. Daniel realized that in all his years of anger toward his father, he had also been harsh with himself. He had blamed himself for not being enough to make his father stay, for wanting a family that seemed beyond repair, and for the loneliness that had become his constant companion. That evening, Daniel sat at his desk, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the blank page before him. He took a deep breath, then began to write, a letter not to his father, but to himself. It was a letter of compassion, a voice of kindness in the wilderness of his heart. He wrote about the pain he had carried for so long, about the nights when tears came unbidden and the days when anger clouded his vision. He wrote about the courage it took to open those old letters and face the man his father had been, the mistakes, the regrets, and the love hidden beneath it all. He wrote about the hope for a future where he could live free from the shadows of the past. When Daniel finally folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope, he felt an unfamiliar lightness. Forgiveness, he now understood, was not an instant gift. It was a journey, one he was willing to take, no matter how slow or painful. And deep inside, he felt a quiet certainty, that his father, in his flawed humanity, had wanted the same peace for him. After weeks of diving deeper into his father's past, Daniel felt like he was standing at a crossroads. The letters had unearthed so much pain, but also so much vulnerability and humanity. Yet, amid the grief and confusion, something unexpected happened. He received a package in the mail. It wasn't large or flashy, just a simple box with no return address, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with twine. Inside, nestled carefully in layers of soft tissue paper, was an old leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and worn from years of handling, and a faded name was embossed faintly on the front, his father's name. His heart pounded as he flipped through the pages. Unlike the letters, which were addressed to others, this journal was raw and unfiltered, his father's private thoughts, written during the darkest days Daniel had read about but never truly understood. It was a treasure trove of regrets, hopes, and moments of profound self-reflection. Daniel read entries about his father's struggles with addiction, his battles with loneliness, and the overwhelming guilt he carried for leaving his family behind. There were moments of clarity and resolve, where he vowed to change, to be better, but also passages filled with despair and hopelessness. One entry caught Daniel's eye. "I fear I am a failure, a ghost in my own life." But if Daniel reads this one day, I want him to know that beneath the flaws and mistakes, I loved him more than words can say. I hope he can find it in his heart to understand and forgive me. Daniel felt tears blur his vision. For the first time, he felt a connection not just to the man who was his father, but to the human being beneath it all, the man who had fought demons in silence, who had loved imperfectly but deeply. He shared the discovery with Evelyn, his voice trembling with emotion. "It's like I'm holding his soul in my hands. I never knew this part of him existed. It changes everything." Evelyn responded softly, "Sometimes, the greatest gift we receive is the chance to see the people we thought we knew in a new light." As Daniel continued reading, he realized the journal was more than just a record of his father's pain. It was also a map, a guide to understanding the complexity of human fragility and forgiveness. His father had left clues to healing, to hope, and to the possibility of breaking the cycle of silence and absence. With the journal, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with tough questions and emotional reckonings. But for the first time in his life, he felt ready to walk it. And in that readiness, he found a fragile but radiant hope, a hope that healing was possible, not just for him, but for everyone who carries the weight of a broken past. Confronting the past is a treacherous journey, a journey Daniel now faced head-on with a mix of apprehension and determination. The discovery of his father's journal was both a blessing and a challenge. It gave him insight but also forced him to look deeply into wounds he had spent years trying to ignore. The night was quiet but heavy as Daniel sat on his worn-out couch, the journal resting on his lap like a fragile relic. The air smelled faintly of rain, the gentle sound of droplets tapping against the windowpane providing an oddly soothing backdrop to his turmoil. He had promised himself that tonight, he would call the one person he never thought he could, his mother. The phone rang several times, each beep intensifying the knot in Daniel's stomach. When she finally answered, her voice was soft but guarded. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Mom, it's me. I've been reading Dad's journal," Daniel began, his voice faltering. "I know we never talk about him, but I think I need to understand. I need to know everything." There was silence on the other end before she spoke again, her tone laced with a bittersweet mixture of pain and relief. "I never wanted to burden you with his mistakes, Daniel. But maybe it's time we faced it all together." That night, as Daniel listened to his mother's stories, the moments of hope, despair, and the bitter reality of raising him alone, he felt a flood of emotions wash over him. For years, the past had been a wall separating them, but now it was a bridge, fragile yet hopeful. His mother spoke of his father's early years, his dreams, and the slow unraveling of the man she once loved. She described the battles he fought quietly, the mistakes he tried to make right, and the moments when love still shone through the cracks. For Daniel, this conversation was both shattering and healing. It challenged his long-held beliefs but also opened a space for compassion he hadn't known he could feel. Days turned into weeks as Daniel began to confront his memories with new eyes. He revisited old places, the park where he and his father once played, the small cafe where they had shared quiet mornings, the faded wallpaper of the childhood home now empty and echoing with silence. Each step was painful but necessary. He journaled his feelings, sometimes writing letters he never sent, sometimes simply sitting with his grief and anger. At the same time, he noticed subtle changes within himself. The anger that once consumed him began to soften, replaced by a quiet strength. He started to understand that confronting the past wasn't about erasing the pain but learning to carry it without letting it define him. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Daniel stood at the edge of the city's old pier, the journal clutched in his hand. The breeze was cool, carrying the scent of salt and distant memories. He opened the book to a blank page and began to write. I don't have all the answers. I don't know what forgiveness looks like yet, but I am ready to find out. For my father. For my mother. For myself. The act of writing was a release, a declaration of hope amid the shadows. Confronting the past was far from easy, but Daniel was learning that healing begins with courage, the courage to face the truth, to feel deeply, and to choose hope even when it feels impossible. The process of confronting the past had left Daniel raw and vulnerable, but it had also sparked something profound within him, a deep yearning not just for understanding, but for connection. The walls that had separated him from his mother and the memory of his father were beginning to crumble, revealing a fragile hope that healing might still be possible. After that difficult phone call with his mother, Daniel knew the next step was to rebuild the bridges he had long abandoned. It wasn't going to be easy. Years of silence and unspoken pain had woven a complex tapestry of misunderstanding between them. But Daniel was determined to try. He started with small gestures, a text message, a brief call, sharing a memory or a photo that brought a smile instead of a sting. At first, the exchanges were cautious, tentative, like stepping on thin ice. But each message was a thread, weaving new patterns of trust. One afternoon, Daniel found himself standing at his mother's doorstep, the old familiar creak of the wooden frame welcoming and simultaneously daunting. His heart hammered in his chest as he stepped inside. The house smelled like home, a blend of lavender, old books, and the faintest trace of his father's cologne. They sat together in the living room, a quiet space filled with memories both sweet and painful. His mother poured tea, and they talked, really talked, about everything they had kept hidden for so long. Daniel shared his discoveries, the journal, the letters, his own fears and hopes. His mother, in turn, opened up about her loneliness, the sacrifices she had made, and the love that never faded despite everything. It was an emotional evening, filled with tears, laughter, and moments of profound understanding. For the first time, Daniel realized that their shared pain did not have to be a barrier. It could be the very foundation upon which they built something new. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They began creating rituals together, Sunday dinners, long walks in the park, and quiet evenings sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future. These moments, small but powerful, slowly healed old wounds. Daniel also reached out to others who had been touched by his father's life, old friends, distant relatives. Some were hesitant, some welcomed him warmly, but each interaction added another piece to the puzzle of his family's history and his own identity. Through these connections, Daniel learned about the man his father had been beyond the pain, the kindness he showed to strangers, the laughter he shared with friends, the dreams he once held dear. This growing understanding was liberating. It gave Daniel the strength to forgive not just his father but himself, for the resentment he had carried, for the love he had withheld. He also realized that building new bridges wasn't about erasing the past but embracing it fully, with all its complexity. It was about accepting imperfection, finding grace in brokenness, and choosing love despite the scars. In this journey, Daniel found a new purpose, to honor his father's memory by breaking the cycle of silence and pain. He began volunteering with a local support group for families affected by addiction, sharing his story and listening to others with empathy and hope. The act of giving back was healing in itself. It connected him to a community of people who understood the struggle, the loss, and the possibility of redemption. One chilly evening, Daniel and his mother sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. He felt a warmth that went beyond the physical, a warmth born from connection, understanding, and the fragile beauty of second chances. As he looked at her, he realized that while the past would always be a part of them, it no longer defined their future. Together, they were building new bridges, bridges of love, forgiveness, and hope. Forgiveness is a strange and complicated thing. For Daniel, it was less about absolving his father and more about freeing himself from the heavy chains of anger and pain he had carried for so many years. It wasn't something that happened overnight, nor was it a simple decision. Forgiveness was a weighty journey, one that demanded courage, patience, and an unwavering commitment to healing. After rebuilding bridges with his mother and reconnecting with fragments of his father's past, Daniel found himself face to face with the most difficult task yet, forgiving the man who had caused him so much heartbreak. Sitting alone in his apartment late one evening, the soft hum of the city outside his window, Daniel turned over the word forgiveness in his mind like a fragile gem. It gleamed with hope but also shimmered with doubt and fear. Could he really forgive? Did he even want to? The journal lay open on his desk, pages filled with his father's raw thoughts and confessions. Reading those words was like peering into a soul laid bare, flawed, fearful, and deeply human. It was painful to see the mistakes and regrets so plainly, but it was also oddly comforting. His father wasn't a monster, he was a man struggling against his own demons. Daniel realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It was about understanding it, embracing the complexity of human imperfection, and choosing to let go of the bitterness that threatened to consume him. He began to write letters, not to send, but to pour out his feelings. Letters filled with anger, sorrow, confusion, and, eventually, hope. Sometimes the words spilled out in torrents, other times, they came in hesitant, halting sentences. Each letter was a step forward on his path. One letter stood out, written on a rainy night when Daniel felt overwhelmed by the weight of his emotions. Dad, I don't know if you ever thought you could be forgiven. I don't know if I'm ready to give that yet. But I'm trying. I'm trying because holding on to the pain feels like a prison I want to escape. I don't have all the answers, but I want to believe there's a way to find peace. Forgiveness became a practice, a daily act of choosing compassion over resentment. It was messy, painful, and sometimes exhausting. But slowly, Daniel noticed a lightness creeping into his spirit, a quiet freedom that came from releasing old wounds. He also sought help outside himself, attending therapy sessions where he could unpack his feelings with someone who understood. Those sessions were often uncomfortable but ultimately empowering. They gave him tools to navigate his emotions and the support to face his past without fear. Forgiving his father also meant forgiving his mother, who had endured her own struggles and pain. Daniel came to see her not just as the woman who raised him but as a survivor, flawed, strong, and deserving of love. Together, they began to rebuild their relationship on this new foundation of honesty and forgiveness. It was not a perfect journey, there were setbacks and difficult conversations, but each step brought them closer. Forgiveness also opened the door to self-forgiveness. Daniel had blamed himself for so much, for the anger he held, the distance he created, and the pain he couldn't escape. But in forgiving his father and mother, he began to forgive himself. He realized that healing was not a destination but a continuous journey. Each day presented new challenges and opportunities to choose grace over bitterness. One crisp morning, as Daniel stood by the window watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, he felt a deep sense of peace. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer felt unbearable. It was part of him, a chapter in his story, not the whole book. He understood that forgiveness was a gift he gave to himself as much as to others. It was a bridge from pain to hope, from darkness to light. In this newfound space of forgiveness, Daniel found the strength to dream again, to imagine a future where love and understanding could flourish, where scars were reminders of survival, not chains of despair. The moment Daniel stepped out of the shadows of his past and began to forgive, he found himself standing at a threshold, one that led toward a new beginning. It wasn't a grand, sweeping transformation overnight, but rather a subtle, profound shift in the way he viewed himself, his family, and his place in the world. Embracing new beginnings meant opening his heart to possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine before. In the days following his growing forgiveness, Daniel started to notice the quiet beauty of life's simple moments, the morning light filtering softly through the blinds, the hum of birds outside his window, the taste of coffee on his tongue. These fragments of ordinary life took on a new vibrancy, as if he was seeing the world with fresh eyes. He began to reimagine what happiness could look like for him. For so long, his definition of contentment was tethered to unresolved grief and silence. Now, it was about connection, purpose, and joy, however small and fleeting. One morning, he woke up with a determination to try something new. Daniel had always loved music but had abandoned his guitar years ago, convinced that his pain made it impossible to play with any real passion. But this time, he picked up the old instrument that had sat in the corner gathering dust and began strumming simple chords. The sound was raw, unpolished, but it awakened something deep inside him, a long-forgotten sense of creativity and hope. Playing music became a way for Daniel to express emotions he hadn't yet found words for, a language that spoke directly to his soul. Around this same time, Daniel reconnected with old friends who had stood by him during his darkest days. These reunions weren't about reliving the past but about celebrating the present, sharing laughter, stories, and plans for the future. One evening, at a small gathering in a cozy apartment filled with warm light and familiar faces, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. It was as if the walls he had built to protect himself were gently falling away, making room for genuine connection. Embracing new beginnings also meant learning to be gentle with himself. Daniel practiced mindfulness, reminding himself daily that healing wasn't linear. Some days would be harder than others, and that was okay. He started journaling again, not just about pain but about gratitude, hopes, and small victories. Writing became a mirror reflecting his growth, a testament to how far he had come and a beacon lighting the way forward. Daniel also took steps toward new professional goals. After years of drifting in jobs that left him feeling empty, he enrolled in a creative writing course. Putting pen to paper in a structured way gave him purpose and reignited a spark he thought was lost forever. His teachers noticed his raw talent and encouraged him to share his story. The idea terrified Daniel but also filled him with a quiet thrill. For the first time, he considered that his experiences, painful as they were, could inspire others and foster healing. New beginnings, he learned, were not about erasing the past but integrating it. They were about building a life that honored both the pain and the joy, the scars and the beauty. Daniel also found solace in nature. Weekend hikes in nearby forests and parks became sacred rituals, moments where he could breathe deeply, feel grounded, and reconnect with the world outside his mind. On one such hike, standing on a ridge overlooking a vast valley painted with the colors of fall, Daniel felt a wave of peace wash over him. The sun warmed his face, the breeze whispered through the trees, and for a moment, all the noise of the past faded away. He understood then that beginnings weren't about perfection but possibility. They were about choosing hope every day, even when it was hard. As Daniel embraced these new chapters, he saw his life unfolding like a book still being written, filled with mystery, challenges, and endless opportunity. In this space, he found freedom to dream, to love, and to be unapologetically himself. Vulnerability was something Daniel had avoided for most of his life. It felt like a dangerous territory, a place where weakness was exposed and judgment lurked around every corner. Yet, as he embarked on this journey of healing and growth, Daniel came to realize that vulnerability was not a curse, but a profound source of strength. It began with small moments, sharing a feeling with a close friend instead of bottling it up, admitting when he didn't have all the answers, and allowing himself to cry when the pain overwhelmed him. Each time he let his guard down, it was terrifying, but also deeply liberating. Daniel discovered that vulnerability created genuine connections. When he stopped pretending to be strong all the time, the people around him responded with empathy and openness. He felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. This shift changed everything, in his friendships, in his family relationships, and most importantly, within himself. He no longer had to hide behind walls built from fear and shame. Instead, he could stand tall in his imperfections and embrace the fullness of his humanity. One afternoon, during a support group meeting, Daniel shared a story from his childhood, a memory he had buried deep. His voice trembled as he spoke about the moments of loneliness, the longing for approval, and the ache of feeling invisible. The room was silent for a beat, then filled with gentle nods and soft words of encouragement. In that circle of strangers turned allies, Daniel found acceptance and strength. That day, he understood that vulnerability was not about oversharing or seeking pity. It was about authenticity, showing up as your true self, even when it's scary. Daniel also began to see vulnerability as a creative force. His writing became richer, more honest, and more powerful. The stories he wrote from a place of openness resonated deeply with readers, touching hearts in ways he never expected. Through vulnerability, Daniel learned to face his fears, the fear of rejection, failure, and being misunderstood. Instead of running away, he leaned in, allowing himself to be seen and heard. This courage inspired others around him. His friends noticed the change, commenting on how much more present and alive he seemed. His mother remarked on the warmth in his eyes, the softness in his voice. Vulnerability also opened new doors in Daniel's romantic life. He cautiously allowed himself to trust and love again, knowing that real intimacy required honesty and openness. There were stumbles and heartbreaks along the way, but Daniel understood that these were part of the journey, reminders that to be vulnerable was to be human. One quiet evening, Daniel sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the transformation vulnerability had sparked within him. It was a reminder that strength and softness were not opposites but partners, each enhancing the other. He had finally learned that to be vulnerable was to be brave. Joy had once felt like a distant memory to Daniel, a fleeting visitor he barely recognized. For so long, his days had been clouded by grief, anxiety, and the heavy weight of expectations, both from others and from himself. But as he moved deeper into his journey of healing, he began to realize that joy wasn't something elusive or reserved for special occasions. It was a seed planted quietly within him, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Rediscovering joy didn't happen all at once. It started with small moments, a burst of laughter during a casual conversation with a friend, the simple delight of watching a sunrise, the unexpected pleasure of tasting his favorite dessert again. These little sparks of happiness felt almost revolutionary after years of numbness. Daniel came to understand that joy was a choice, an intentional act of opening his heart to the present, no matter how imperfect. It wasn't about forcing smiles or pretending everything was okay. Rather, it was about honoring the full spectrum of his experience, pain and pleasure, sorrow and delight, and allowing joy to weave itself gently into the fabric of his life. He made a conscious effort to surround himself with things and people that nurtured this newfound joy. He filled his home with colors that made him smile, played music that lifted his spirit, and sought out friends whose laughter was contagious. One afternoon, Daniel signed up for a cooking class, something spontaneous and outside his comfort zone. As he chopped vegetables and learned new recipes, he felt a playful energy bubbling inside him. The joy of creating something with his own hands, the camaraderie of fellow students, the aromas filling the air, all of it sparked a lightness in his soul. He also reconnected with old hobbies he had abandoned, like painting and hiking. Each brushstroke on the canvas was an expression of his inner world, a way to release emotions without words. And every step on a forest trail was a reminder of the beauty surrounding him, a balm for his weary mind. But rediscovering joy wasn't just about external experiences. Daniel realized it was also about cultivating kindness toward himself, forgiving his mistakes, celebrating his progress, and treating himself with the compassion he freely gave to others. One particularly joyful moment came unexpectedly. Daniel was at a friend's wedding, standing beneath a sky bursting with stars. As the music played and laughter filled the air, he felt a profound sense of belonging. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of the moment. In that instant, Daniel knew joy wasn't about perfection or the absence of pain. It was about presence, being fully alive, fully human, fully open to whatever life brought. Joy became a refuge, a source of resilience that carried him through tougher days. It reminded him that even amidst hardship, life held moments of wonder worth cherishing. As Daniel continued to rediscover joy, he noticed a ripple effect. His relationships deepened, his creativity blossomed, and his outlook on life brightened. More than anything, joy taught him that healing was possible, that even after darkness, light could shine again. Forgiveness was a word Daniel had always associated with weakness, a surrender that felt too painful and too uncertain. For years, he carried grudges like armor, believing that holding on to anger and resentment protected him from further hurt. But as his journey unfolded, he came to understand that forgiveness was not a gift to others, it was a gift to himself, a key to freedom. The path to forgiveness wasn't simple or linear. It began with acknowledging the pain, naming the wounds that ran deep, whether inflicted by others or by his own mistakes. Daniel realized that pretending everything was okay only buried the hurt beneath a surface that eventually cracked. One afternoon, sitting alone by the window, Daniel thought about his father. Their relationship had been strained, full of misunderstandings and unspoken regrets. The silence between them had stretched for years, leaving a hollow ache in Daniel's heart. He knew forgiveness wouldn't erase the past, but it might help him let go of the bitterness that held him captive. With trembling hands, Daniel wrote a letter to his father, not to send, but to release. He poured out his feelings, the pain, the longing, the hopes for peace. As the words flowed onto the paper, Daniel felt a weight lift. It was as if the act of naming his feelings gave them permission to exist without controlling him. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about excusing wrongs or forgetting the lessons learned. It was about reclaiming his power, choosing peace over anger, healing over hurt. He also learned to forgive himself. For the mistakes he had made, for the times he hadn't been strong enough, for the moments he let fear guide him instead of courage. This self-forgiveness was the hardest of all, but also the most transformative. With each step forward, Daniel noticed subtle shifts in his heart. The tightness of resentment softened, replaced by a quiet strength. He felt lighter, freer, more open to love and connection. One day, he reached out to his father. The conversation was tentative at first, filled with pauses and vulnerable truths. But as they spoke honestly and listened deeply, bridges began to form where walls once stood. This reunion wasn't perfect, there were still scars and uncertainties, but it was real, and that was enough. Daniel also forgave others who had hurt him, friends who betrayed trust, colleagues who undermined him, and strangers who showed cruelty. Not for their sake, but for his own peace. This strength in forgiveness gave Daniel a new perspective on life. He understood that holding on to anger only prolonged suffering, while letting go opened space for healing and growth. Forgiveness became a daily practice, a choice he made when old wounds threatened to resurface. It was not a destination but a journey, one that required patience, courage, and grace. In forgiving, Daniel discovered a profound liberation, a freedom to live fully without the chains of past pain. After years of drifting through emotional turbulence, Daniel finally stood on the edge of something new, the chance to rebuild his life on a foundation of strength, clarity, and hope. The old structures that had once defined him, his fears, doubts, and limiting beliefs, were slowly crumbling away. Now, the work was to build something that could support his dreams and nourish his spirit. Building new foundations wasn't just about big, sweeping changes. It was about daily, intentional actions that added up to lasting transformation. Daniel understood that this process required patience and humility. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens steadily, brick by brick, choice by choice. He started by revisiting his values, the core beliefs that shaped who he was and who he wanted to become. He journaled late into the nights, answering questions he'd never dared ask himself. What matters most? What kind of person do I want to be? What legacy do I want to leave? These questions brought clarity. Daniel realized he craved authenticity, kindness, and courage. He wanted relationships rooted in honesty and respect. He wanted a life that felt meaningful, not just busy. With this clarity, Daniel set clear boundaries, something he had struggled with before. He learned to say no to things that drained him, and yes to things that energized him. This was hard at first. Old patterns of people-pleasing and fear of rejection tried to pull him back, but Daniel stood firm. He also focused on his health, physical, emotional, and mental. He established a morning routine that included gentle stretching, a few minutes of meditation, and nourishing breakfast. Exercise wasn't a punishment anymore, but a celebration of what his body could do. Daniel surrounded himself with positive influences. He sought mentors and friends who inspired him to grow. He joined communities where vulnerability and support were the norm, not the exception. At work, Daniel began to take on projects that aligned with his passion and purpose, rather than just what was expected. He felt more engaged and alive. The stress didn't disappear completely, but he developed better tools to manage it. One particularly powerful moment came when Daniel volunteered at a local shelter. Serving others who were struggling reminded him of his own journey and deepened his gratitude. It connected him to something bigger than himself. Building new foundations also meant forgiving the past, a theme that wove through his entire healing process. By forgiving, Daniel cleared the debris that blocked his path forward. Sometimes, he encountered setbacks and self-doubt. But each time, he reminded himself that growth was not linear. He embraced these moments as opportunities to learn resilience. Daniel's new foundation wasn't perfect, no foundation ever is, but it was solid, flexible, and true to who he was becoming. It gave him a place to stand firmly and face whatever the future held. As he looked out at the horizon one quiet evening, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. The journey was far from over, but he had built a home within himself, a home that could weather storms and bask in sunlight. This foundation was his gift to himself, a promise that no matter what, he would keep growing, keep healing, and keep building the life he truly deserved. For much of his life, Daniel had been a prisoner of perfectionism. The relentless pursuit of flawlessness had cast a shadow over his every accomplishment, turning joy into anxiety, and progress into paralysis. Every mistake felt like a failure, every flaw was magnified by a harsh inner critic that refused to soften. But as Daniel continued his journey, he came to a radical realization: imperfection was not his enemy, it was his humanity. The cracks, the scars, the messy moments, they were what made life real, beautiful, and meaningful. Learning to embrace imperfection didn't happen overnight. It began with small acts of kindness toward himself. Instead of berating himself for forgetting a deadline or stumbling over a conversation, Daniel started pausing and speaking gently in his mind. "It's okay. You're doing your best." This shift was profound. The voice of self-compassion grew louder than the voice of judgment. Daniel also began to notice how perfectionism had kept him stuck in fear, the fear of being judged, of not measuring up, of disappointing others. By trying to control every detail, he had created a prison of his own making. One afternoon, at a local art class, Daniel found a metaphor that resonated deeply. The instructor encouraged everyone to create without expectation, to let the brush dance freely on the canvas. Daniel's first attempts were awkward and hesitant. But as he let go, the strokes became freer, more expressive, and surprisingly beautiful. This experience was a turning point. Art taught Daniel that beauty often comes from imperfection, from the raw honesty of creation rather than the pursuit of flawless technique. He carried this lesson into his relationships. Instead of trying to be the perfect friend, perfect partner, or perfect son, Daniel chose to be authentic. He allowed himself to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to laugh at awkward moments. This authenticity deepened his connections, creating space for others to be imperfect too. It was liberating, a shared freedom from the chains of unrealistic expectations. Embracing imperfection also meant accepting that life itself was unpredictable and messy. Plans would fail, dreams would shift, and setbacks would happen. But these challenges didn't diminish Daniel's worth. They enriched his story. He began to see failures not as endpoints, but as detours leading to new insights and growth. Each stumble was an invitation to learn resilience, humility, and grace. Daniel's newfound acceptance radiated outward, influencing his work, friendships, and even casual interactions with strangers. People responded to his warmth and honesty, often opening up about their own struggles. The hardest part was still forgiving himself for long-held beliefs that perfection was the only path to success and love. But with every compassionate thought and brave step, those beliefs loosened their grip. Embracing imperfection gave Daniel permission to live fully, to try, fail, laugh, cry, and try again, all without fear. This acceptance wasn't a surrender to mediocrity but a celebration of realness. It was a daily choice to show up as he was, knowing that was enough. Daniel understood that imperfection was the heartbeat of a life well lived, a life rich with learning, love, and meaning. In embracing his flaws, he found freedom. In accepting his humanity, he found peace. And in that peace, Daniel finally began to truly live. In a world that seemed to rush by in a blur of notifications, deadlines, and distractions, Daniel discovered one of the most profound gifts he could give himself and others, the power of presence. Being fully here, fully engaged in the moment, became a quiet revolution in his life. For years, Daniel had been physically present but mentally miles away, his mind bouncing between worries about the future, regrets about the past, and the endless noise of digital distractions. He rarely allowed himself to simply be. The shift began on an ordinary evening when he found himself watching his niece play in the backyard. For the first time in a long while, he noticed the small details, the way the sun caught her hair, the sound of her laughter mixing with the rustling leaves, the pure joy in her eyes. In that moment, Daniel felt a deep calm wash over him, a gentle reminder that life was happening now, not in some distant place or time. Presence, Daniel realized, was a radical act of love, love for oneself and for others. It required slowing down, tuning in, and fully engaging with whatever was unfolding. He started practicing presence intentionally. At meals, he put away his phone and savored each bite, noticing flavors and textures he had previously ignored. In conversations, he listened without planning responses or checking the clock. He noticed how this simple shift deepened his relationships, making others feel truly seen and heard. Presence also became a balm during difficult moments. Instead of spiraling into anxious thoughts or trying to escape uncomfortable feelings, Daniel learned to sit with them, observe them without judgment, and breathe through the intensity. He practiced mindfulness exercises, feeling the ground beneath his feet, the rhythm of his breath, the sensations of his body. These small acts grounded him, creating a stable anchor in the chaos of life. Workdays, which had once left him drained and disconnected, transformed when he focused fully on one task at a time. His productivity improved, but more importantly, his stress decreased. He felt more in control and less scattered. Presence wasn't always easy. The pull of distractions was strong, and old habits beckoned. But Daniel kept returning to the practice, knowing that every moment spent fully present was a step toward a more meaningful life. He also noticed that presence deepened his appreciation for beauty, in nature, art, music, and the simple moments between. Life's colors became richer, its sounds more vivid, its textures more tangible. One evening, Daniel sat quietly with a cup of tea, watching the twilight deepen into night. He felt a quiet gratitude for this moment, for the stillness, for the breath, for the chance to simply be. He understood now that presence wasn't about perfection or productivity, it was about connection, connection to life, to others, and most importantly, to himself. The power of presence became a cornerstone of Daniel's new life foundation. It taught him patience when things were hard, joy in the everyday, and peace in the midst of uncertainty. Most of all, presence taught him to trust the flow of life, to meet each moment with openness and curiosity rather than resistance and fear. Daniel's journey into presence was ongoing, a daily invitation to slow down, breathe, and show up fully. And with each step, he found himself more alive, more grounded, and more deeply connected to the world around him. Presence became his superpower, quietly transforming the way he lived, loved, and dreamed. Control had been Daniel's constant companion, the steady, unyielding grip he clung to in an unpredictable world. It gave him a false sense of safety, a belief that if he could just manage every detail, every outcome, he could avoid pain, disappointment, or failure. But life, as Daniel painfully learned, does not bend easily to our will. It started with small cracks, a missed deadline, an unexpected conflict, a sudden illness. Then larger upheavals came, plans derailed, relationships tested, dreams deferred. The more Daniel tried to steer the wheel, the more exhausted and frustrated he became. He realized that control was an illusion, a mirage promising certainty in a world defined by uncertainty. This revelation was both terrifying and freeing. Letting go of control didn't mean giving up or surrendering to chaos. It meant accepting that some things were simply beyond his reach. It meant learning to flow with life's currents rather than swimming upstream against them. Daniel began this practice slowly. He started by noticing the areas where his need for control was strongest: work, relationships, personal goals. He asked himself, what fears were driving this need? What was he afraid would happen if he loosened his grip? The answers were raw and honest. Fear of failure. Fear of rejection. Fear of loss. Armed with awareness, Daniel took small steps toward surrender. When faced with a sudden change in plans, instead of spiraling into anxiety, he paused and breathed. He reminded himself that uncertainty was part of the human experience. This mindset shift wasn't easy. The urge to control was deeply ingrained, a habit formed over years of conditioning. But with practice, Daniel found that letting go created space for creativity, for connection, for peace. He learned to trust himself more deeply, not in his ability to predict or manipulate outcomes, but in his resilience to handle whatever came. This trust blossomed over time. Daniel began to notice that some of life's richest moments came not from meticulous planning, but from spontaneous, unplanned experiences. A last-minute road trip with friends. An unexpected conversation that sparked new insight. A quiet walk taken simply because the mood struck. Letting go also deepened Daniel's relationships. When he stopped trying to control others' reactions or behaviors, he found he could connect more authentically. He learned to accept people as they were, imperfections and all, rather than as he wished them to be. This acceptance softened old wounds and built bridges where there had been walls. Daniel discovered that surrendering control didn't make him weak, it made him stronger. It required courage to face uncertainty and vulnerability to trust the unknown. In this new way of living, Daniel felt lighter, freer, and more aligned with the natural rhythms of life. He learned to ride the waves rather than resist them, to dance with change instead of fearing it. Letting go became an act of faith in himself, in others, and in the unfolding journey. Daniel understood that life was less about controlling the narrative and more about being present in the story, with all its twists, turns, and surprises. This surrender allowed him to embrace imperfection, uncertainty, and growth with open arms. It was a powerful lesson that transformed not only his mindset but his entire experience of living. As Daniel let go of control, he found peace in the unpredictable, joy in the spontaneous, and love in the messy, beautiful reality of being human. And in that space, he finally felt truly free. For most of his life, Daniel had been taught that vulnerability was weakness, a chink in the armor that could be exploited, a flaw to hide at all costs. Growing up, he learned to keep his emotions tightly sealed, to mask pain with a stoic face, and to meet challenges with a stiff upper lip. But as Daniel's journey deepened, he discovered a powerful truth: vulnerability is not weakness. It is the birthplace of courage, connection, and profound strength. This lesson didn't come easily. It was born out of moments when the walls he built around himself began to crack, moments of heartbreak, loss, and honest self-reflection. Daniel remembers the first time he truly allowed himself to be vulnerable with someone he trusted. It was with a close friend after a particularly difficult day. Instead of hiding behind humor or distractions, he simply said, "I'm struggling." The words felt strange and fragile, like stepping onto thin ice. To his surprise, his friend didn't recoil or judge. Instead, they listened deeply, with empathy and compassion. In that simple act of sharing, Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest. He realized he didn't have to carry his burdens alone. Vulnerability opened a door to authentic connection. From that day on, Daniel began to practice vulnerability as a daily act of bravery. He started with small things, sharing a fear, admitting a mistake, expressing gratitude. Each time he showed up as his authentic self, he felt a growing sense of freedom. The need to pretend, to perform, to wear a mask, began to fade. Vulnerability became a bridge between Daniel and those around him. It created space for others to be real as well. Conversations became richer, relationships deeper, and moments more meaningful. But vulnerability wasn't just about relationships. It was also about his relationship with himself. Daniel learned to face his own inner struggles without judgment. Instead of running from difficult emotions, he sat with them, acknowledged them, and allowed himself to feel. This self-compassion was revolutionary. It broke the cycle of self-criticism and shame that had held him captive for years. Daniel discovered that vulnerability required tremendous courage, courage to be seen, to risk rejection, to embrace uncertainty. Yet paradoxically, in embracing vulnerability, he found strength, a strength that was softer, yet more resilient than anything he had known before. He realized that true strength is not about perfection or invulnerability, it is about openness, honesty, and the willingness to be imperfect. This newfound strength gave Daniel the confidence to pursue his dreams more fully, to speak his truth, and to live with greater authenticity. It also taught him empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Vulnerability became a gift that deepened his compassion and connected him to the shared human experience. Daniel's life began to transform as he embraced vulnerability as a source of power. He no longer feared his emotions or the unknown. Instead, he welcomed them as guides on his journey. He learned that vulnerability is the heart's way of saying, "I am human, I am alive, and I am enough." In this acceptance, Daniel found healing, connection, and an unshakable inner strength. His journey showed him that vulnerability is not a weakness to be hidden but a strength to be celebrated, the courageous act of living fully and authentically in a complex world. Change, it's the one constant Daniel had tried to resist for most of his life. The upheavals, the uncertainties, the twists and turns, they made him uneasy. He had always clung to routines, familiar faces, and predictable paths because they gave him a sense of control, stability, and safety. But change, as Daniel gradually realized, is not the enemy. It is a powerful catalyst for growth, transformation, and self-discovery. His journey to this understanding wasn't a gentle one. It came in waves, sudden, jarring, and sometimes painful. A job lost. A relationship ended. Dreams deferred. These changes shook Daniel to his core, forcing him to confront fears he had buried deep within. At first, Daniel resisted. He fought the changes, hoping they would pass, that life would return to normal. But the harder he resisted, the more exhausting life became. Then one day, a simple insight shifted his perspective. Instead of viewing change as a threat, what if he saw it as an opportunity? An invitation to evolve rather than an obstacle to endure? With this question in mind, Daniel began to lean into change with curiosity rather than fear. He noticed that every time he faced a transition, even the difficult ones, he emerged with new wisdom, resilience, and strength. The challenges forced him to stretch beyond his comfort zone, to adapt, and to see the world through fresh eyes. This wasn't easy. Growth demanded patience, effort, and the willingness to embrace discomfort. Change uprooted old beliefs and habits that no longer served him, creating space for new possibilities. Daniel started to see life as a series of seasons, some joyful and abundant, others barren and testing, but all necessary for the cycle of renewal. He began to practice gratitude for change, even when it hurt. He thanked his struggles for the lessons they brought. He honored endings as preludes to beginnings. This mindset shift was transformative. Instead of fearing the unknown, Daniel approached it with openness and hope. He realized that clinging to the past only delayed growth and caused unnecessary suffering. Embracing change meant surrendering to life's natural rhythm, trusting that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. This acceptance deepened Daniel's sense of peace. He felt lighter, less burdened by expectations or regrets. He learned to dance with uncertainty, knowing that every step forward, even the stumbles, moved him closer to becoming the person he was meant to be. Daniel's relationships grew richer as he allowed change to shape rather than break them. He became more flexible, compassionate, and present with others. He stopped resisting differences and imperfections, seeing them as part of the beautiful mosaic of human connection. His career evolved too, as he embraced opportunities that once seemed risky or impossible. Change opened doors to new passions and purposes. Most importantly, Daniel learned to trust himself through every twist and turn. He understood that growth is not a straight line but a winding journey filled with detours and surprises. He celebrated the small victories, a moment of courage, a fresh perspective, a renewed sense of hope. Each step into change was a step into greater self-awareness and empowerment. Daniel's story reminds us that change is not something to fear or avoid, but a vital force that shapes our lives in profound and meaningful ways. By embracing change as growth, we unlock the potential to become stronger, wiser, and more authentic versions of ourselves. And in that process, we discover that life's greatest gifts often come wrapped in the unexpected. If Daniel's life had taught him one thing beyond all else, it was that resilience is not something you're born with, it's something you build, piece by piece, through the fires of adversity. The raw, often painful challenges he had faced were not merely obstacles to overcome, they were the very furnace that forged his strength, character, and resolve. Early on, Daniel believed that resilience was about enduring hardship silently, about bearing pain without complaint. But life showed him otherwise. Resilience was not stoic silence, it was a dynamic, living force that required action, reflection, and a refusal to be defeated. Adversity had come in many forms: personal loss, shattered dreams, betrayals, moments when the future seemed impossibly bleak. Each time, Daniel found himself at a crossroads, to give in to despair or to rise with renewed determination. He learned the hard way that resilience was never about avoiding pain. Instead, it was about learning how to move through it with grace and courage. It was about taking each setback as a lesson, each wound as a doorway to healing. One of the most defining moments of Daniel's journey was when he lost someone deeply important to him. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown him. But slowly, day by day, he found ways to keep going. He sought support, expressed his feelings, and allowed himself to mourn fully. In that vulnerability, Daniel discovered that resilience is rooted in connection. It's the people who stand with us in our darkest moments who give us the strength to carry on. It's the kindness we show ourselves that fuels our recovery. Daniel also learned the importance of mindset. Resilience was a choice, a commitment to face life's storms with hope rather than surrender. He began to reframe adversity, not as punishment, but as an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Practices like journaling, mindfulness, and self-care became his tools for building resilience. Each morning, he set intentions to face challenges with patience and courage. Each night, he reflected on lessons learned, celebrating small victories and forgiving setbacks. Daniel's resilience was not linear. There were days he stumbled, felt overwhelmed, or doubted himself. But what mattered was that he kept getting back up, refusing to let adversity define him. He realized that resilience was about persistence, the quiet, steady refusal to give up on oneself, no matter how difficult the path. His story illustrates that resilience is not a destination but a lifelong journey. It is built in the ordinary moments, the decision to try again, to ask for help, to be kind to oneself. Through adversity, Daniel became more than just strong, he became deeply human, capable of both vulnerability and fortitude. He found peace in knowing that hardship was part of life's fabric, but it did not have to unravel his spirit. Instead, it could weave a tapestry of courage, hope, and enduring strength. Daniel had often chased after big milestones, believing that happiness was something to be found only in the grand achievements of life, the dream job, the perfect relationship, or a future filled with promise. Yet, after years of striving and disappointment, he realized that true joy was far more subtle, far more present, than he had imagined. It lived in the small, often overlooked moments that make up the fabric of our days. The idea that joy could be cultivated like a garden was a revelation to him. It wasn't a fleeting emotion dependent on external circumstances, but a deliberate practice, a conscious choice to notice, appreciate, and savor life's simple pleasures. Daniel began to notice the way sunlight streamed through his window in the morning, the gentle hum of the city waking up, the comforting aroma of his coffee brewing. These were not insignificant details but invitations to presence, moments that grounded him in the here and now. He made it a habit to pause, breathe, and savor these fragments of beauty, no matter how busy or chaotic life became. Over time, these tiny sparks of joy created a steady glow, warming even his most difficult days. Daniel also found joy in connection, a genuine smile from a stranger, the laughter of friends gathered around a table, the shared silence with someone who truly understood him. He learned that joy multiplies when it is shared, turning ordinary moments into treasured memories. This practice of mindfulness and gratitude transformed how Daniel approached his days. Instead of waiting for, someday, to be happy, he found happiness in the now, in the texture of everyday life. He began journaling about moments that brought him joy, from the unexpected kindness of a barista to the comforting routine of his evening walk. These entries became a source of strength and hope, especially on days when life felt overwhelming. Daniel also embraced playfulness and curiosity, allowing himself to be silly, creative, and spontaneous, qualities he had neglected in the pursuit of responsibility and success. Whether it was trying a new recipe, dancing to his favorite song alone in his apartment, or exploring a nearby park, Daniel rediscovered the joy of simply being alive. He realized that cultivating joy wasn't about denying life's hardships or pretending everything was perfect. It was about holding space for happiness alongside sorrow, recognizing that both are essential parts of the human experience. This balanced approach allowed Daniel to experience life more fully, with a heart open to wonder and gratitude. His journey toward cultivating joy also inspired him to spread kindness and generosity. He saw that acts of giving, whether a compliment, a helping hand, or listening without judgment, not only uplifted others but also enriched his own soul. Daniel's story is a reminder that joy is not a distant destination but a daily practice. It grows from the seeds of awareness, gratitude, connection, and playfulness. By choosing to cultivate joy in everyday moments, we can transform our lives into a celebration of all that is beautiful, meaningful, and alive. And in doing so, we invite more light and love into the world around us. As Daniel's journey unfolded, he discovered something profound. The most lasting and meaningful source of joy and fulfillment came not from what he could gain, but from what he could give. Finding purpose through service became a turning point that reshaped his understanding of life and himself. At first, Daniel was hesitant. The idea of serving others felt like a lofty ideal, reserved for saints or superheroes, not for someone ordinary and flawed like him. But life, with its quiet insistence, nudged him towards small acts of kindness, and slowly, the veil lifted. He started volunteering at a local community center, helping with after-school programs for children. The experience was humbling and eye-opening. Watching kids who faced challenges he could hardly imagine, poverty, instability, loneliness, he felt a surge of compassion and a deep sense of connection. Through service, Daniel realized that purpose isn't a grand, abstract concept. It's found in the simple, tangible moments when we make someone else's day a little better. It's in offering a listening ear, sharing a smile, or lending a helping hand without expectation. This shift in perspective gave Daniel a new lens through which to view his own struggles. The pain and hardships he had endured weren't just obstacles, they were bridges that allowed him to connect with others who suffered. His experience became a source of empathy, and empathy became a tool for healing. Daniel's acts of service grew naturally from his heart. He organized food drives, mentored youth, and volunteered at shelters. Each interaction deepened his sense of belonging and significance, filling a void that ambition alone could never touch. He found that service was not about self-sacrifice or martyrdom, it was an exchange of love and humanity. By giving, he received more, a renewed sense of hope, gratitude, and purpose. This journey also brought unexpected lessons. Daniel learned patience, humility, and the beauty of imperfection. He saw that sometimes, just showing up and being present was enough. The ripple effects of his service extended beyond himself. Communities strengthened, bonds were forged, and lives were touched in ways he never imagined. Most importantly, Daniel's heart expanded. He became part of something greater than himself, a shared mission to make the world a little kinder and more just. Finding purpose through service didn't erase life's difficulties, but it infused his journey with meaning and direction. It became a beacon that guided him through darkness, reminding him that even in pain, he could choose love. Daniel's story invites us to consider how our own lives might be enriched by serving others, not because we are perfect or have all the answers, but because we are human, capable of compassion and connection. Through service, we discover that our greatest gifts often come from the simple act of giving without expectation. And in that giving, we find the true heart of purpose. Daniel stood on the threshold of a new chapter in his life, one not defined by grand achievements or fleeting successes, but by a quiet, resilient commitment to living fully and authentically. The journey he had traveled was not without pain, mistakes, or loss, but it was rich with lessons, growth, and newfound hope. And now, as he looked forward, he felt a deep sense of peace mixed with anticipation. He understood that life was not about arriving at a fixed destination, but about embracing the journey itself, every twist, turn, challenge, and triumph. This realization freed him from the burden of perfection and the pressure to have it all figured out. Instead, it invited him to savor the unfolding story, day by day. Daniel's experiences had taught him the power of presence, to live in the moment with openness and gratitude. He had learned to slow down, to listen deeply to himself and others, and to recognize that meaning is found not just in big events but in the small, everyday acts of kindness, courage, and love. He felt grateful for the people who had walked alongside him, friends who held space without judgment, strangers whose brief acts of kindness left lasting impressions, and the communities that welcomed him when he was ready to serve. Each connection was a thread in the tapestry of his life, weaving a story far richer than he could have imagined. Though he had faced seasons of doubt and darkness, Daniel now viewed those moments as integral parts of his journey, the shadows that made the light more profound. He embraced the imperfect, messy, and unpredictable nature of life, knowing that true growth often comes from surrendering control and trusting the process. With a heart full of compassion and hope, Daniel looked ahead to the future, not with fear or expectation, but with curiosity and openness. He recognized that the road would continue to have challenges, but he also knew he had the resilience, tools, and support to navigate whatever came his way. This was not an ending, but a continuation, a new beginning filled with endless possibilities. Daniel's story is a testament to the human spirit's capacity to heal, transform, and find joy even in the face of hardship. And now, as you listen to Daniel's journey, perhaps you feel a spark within yourself, a call to embrace your own path with courage, kindness, and curiosity. Maybe you see the beauty in your own struggles and the potential for growth and connection that lies ahead. Life is a story still being written, and the pen is in your hands. The chapters yet to come are unwritten, full of mystery, hope, and promise. So here's to the journey, to the courage to begin again, to the wisdom gained from every step, and to the joy found in embracing life exactly as it is. Because in the end, it is the journey itself that shapes us, teaches us, and ultimately defines who we are.